Okay guys, in today's video, I'm going to be talking about a hot topic in the RV community, and that is plumbing systems. If you go on to a discussion forum on Facebook or another social media site, there's always at least one post out there with someone talking about plumbing and maybe flex lines and complaining about how the manufacturer installed flex lines on their RVs and they use the wrong fittings. You see that over and over and over and over. And I've always really struggled with that notion because, people are accusing the manufacturers basically of making all these RVs, thousands of them and several brands, right? And that they're putting the wrong fittings over and over and over again, even after they've been confronted. But at the same time, these posts are real posts from real people having real problems with their plumbing system. And a lot of it is flex line. And so I can't discount those problems because those are real problems. Now, for me personally, I've been RVing now for about 10 years. I've had 5 different RVs. Yes, I know it's a lot of RVs in 10 years. It took me a while to figure out what I liked most. But among those 5 RVs, all of them had flex line at least somewhere in the RV, to varying degrees. This one has a lot more flex line than other ones I've owned in the past. And I have personally never had a plumbing leak on a flex line or a regular PEX line with plastic fittings. And so when I've read these posts, I've often thought, okay, this is something I need to be aware of. I need to keep a close eye and make sure I don't have any leaks. But again, for me personally, over the last 10 years, I've never had a plumbing leak on a flex line or a regular line. And it is a perplexing question. How do you reconcile real owners that are having real plumbing problems with their flex lines leaking? How do you reconcile that to manufacturers that are continuing to manufacture thousands and thousands of RVs, many different manufacturers, right? And they're still using those same flex lines that the owners are complaining about. I mean, I've heard several RV techs point out that manufacturers are using the wrong fittings with the flex line. I've even had commenters in some of my videos that were loosely associated with plumbing, where the plumbing was shown at some point in the video, and people have commented and said, hey, watch out, you've got some flex lines, you're gonna need to replace those or fix those over time. And so in thinking about all this, I've come up with a theory, and I'll use that term theory loosely, but I've come up with a theory that perhaps there's a good, better, best type plumbing system, in the RV industry, and perhaps that's what's actually going on here. And that maybe, just maybe, some of the leaking is due to operator error. And if you're one of those folks watching this and you've had the, leaks with your flex lines, again, I'm not saying that you've done something wrong, but I'm just saying maybe some of it is due to operator error, such as not winterizing an RV and, it freezes and expands and then it contracts later and loosens up some of those fittings, or perhaps not using a proper pressure reducing valve, a pressure regulating valve that keeps the pressure, at a modest level when you're at a campsite. And so just maybe there's some operator error going on, and then perhaps there is a good, better, best type situation. And so in today's video, I want to at least test some of these different plumbing systems and expose them to extreme freezing temperatures and just see what does that do, and kind of test this theory and see if that's perhaps what is going on here. Okay, so in order to do that, I've got 4 different plumbing systems here that I'm going to build out for the test. First, I've got the most loved, you guessed it, the flex pipe with plastic fittings and stainless steel crimp rings. By the way, I'm going to put a different dye in each one of these for the tests so that each one has a unique color, and that way I can tell if one of them is leaking. The flex pipe here is going to have blue dye. Then I've got the more conventional, the regular PEX pipe. This is PEX B, by the way. And I'm using regular plastic fittings with the same stainless steel crimp rings. Really, I would say this is by far the most popular plumbing combination that you're going to find in the majority of RVs today. Just regular plastic fittings, regular PEX pipe with the stainless steel crimp rings. And I'll be using green dye for this one. Then third, I've got the same PEX pipe, the PEX B, but this time I'm going to use brass fittings instead of plastic. Same stainless steel crimp rings. And there is a relatively new RV brand I'll just mention that is exclusively using these same brass fittings And of course, they're advertising it as being more robust than plastic because, you know, of course, metal is always better than plastic, right? Well, we're going to find out. And then last, I've got PEX B pipe, same pipe as the last two, but this time I'm using SharkBite fittings. These are the new Max version, by the way, so they're more robust than the standard. And I'll talk more about why I'm including the SharkBite fittings in the test later in the video. But basically what I did is I cut all of the pipes to the same exact length, and then I assembled them all in the same shape with a T in the middle. So there's 3 pipes total in each set with a T tying them together in the middle and then plugs on all 3 of the ends to terminate them. On the first 3 systems, there's a total of 6 crimp rings, 3 plugs, and then of course 1 T in the middle. Whereas on the last system with the SharkBite fittings, there are 3 plugs and 1 T. There's no crimp rings needed on that system. So I assembled everything together on all 4 of the systems. I left one end open on each so that I could fill them, you know, with the water and the dye. And as I filled each one, what I found is that I had to vigorously shake it with my thumb, you know, covering the open end in order to have the water, you know, settle and force it to completely fill the pipes. You know, I wanted to make sure that each sample set was completely full of water for, you know, to have a level playing field. And I found it took, you know, 4 to 5 really sequences of shaking, then filling with water, shaking, and so forth till they were all completely full. And then last, I added the corresponding dye into each system so that, again, I can easily tell if any of them are leaking over the course of the tests. And so you can see there I'm using 4 different colors of dye. And once they were completely full with the water and the dye, I put the final plug and crimp ring on, and then I gave them all a good final shake just to test for leaks, you know, and to make sure that the dye was mixed in with all the water. And if you're curious, none of them leaked at this point, so they were all installed properly. And then I took each of the 4 systems, placed them all in a freezer with a Govee temperature sensor so that I can accurately track the temperature in the freezer. I started out at a modest 33, 34 degrees Fahrenheit, you know, just above freezing. And then, as you'll see in the next few clips, I gradually lowered that temperature all the way down to about 6 degrees before I took them out to thaw. And so let me cut to those clips and show you the data. All right, folks, we're not quite at 24 hours, almost 22 hours since I started. And of course, I've been gradually ramping the temperature downwards. And for the last few hours, it's been hovering just under the freezing temperature of 32 degrees. So let's take a quick peek and see what we've got going on here. I don't anticipate anything yet because, like I said, we're just barely under the temperature. It is very cold in here. But yeah, so far, no surprises. Nothing has burst yet. So I'm going to leave it in here overnight and see what we're looking in the morning. So we're right at about 36 hours into the experiment, and really for the last 24 hours or so it's been right at 32 degrees, just above or below. So I wouldn't expect anything yet. Let's just take a quick peek. The flex line, nothing going on there. Same on the plastic fittings, nothing on the brass, and nothing on the SharkBite. We're at just over 62 hours into the experiment, and it has been an average of about 28 degrees over the last 8 hours. So let's take a peek and see what we've got so far. We've got the flex line on top here. Nothing going on there yet. We've got the plastic fittings down below. Nothing going on there either. About the brass, everything looks the same on the brass, and then on our SharkBite, yeah, nothing bursting there yet. So I'm going to keep taking the temperature down a little bit more, and we'll just see if we get any activity later. Well, we're at 86 hours into the experiment, and really for the last 24 hours, it has been well under freezing, averaging around 21 degrees. And for the last 8 hours, it's been really in the high teens. I'm actually seeing on the the cooler some condensation. So I mean, it is getting really cold in there, and I'm really curious to see what we've got right now. So let's take a peek here first at the flex. Wow, I really thought I would see something that had burst by now, but this one, no damage whatsoever. The plastic, there's some frost on the T right there, but this one hasn't burst yet. Same thing on the brass one. Yeah, wow, I'm really surprised. I thought surely at least one of these would have burst by now. Wow. Well, that is really impressive. So I'm going to keep turning the temperature down on it and check back again. Okay, folks, so today is the grand finale. This is the 5th day of the experiment. It's been a total of 111 hours since I put the pipes into the freezer, and really the last 10 hours it's been averaging about 7 degrees Fahrenheit. And so I think at this point I've exposed the pipes to some pretty extreme temperatures in terms of freezing. And so let's see if anything has burst or expanded. All right, let's see what we got here. First up, we got our flex. Nothing obvious on this one, just taking a quick peek at it there. Then next we've got our plastic PEX fittings. Yeah, same here. Nothing obvious going on with that one either. And we got our brass fittings right here. And this one appears to be okay too. What about the SharkBite? Okay, so yeah, I mean, I'm looking at the depth gauge marks that I made. And I mean, maybe this one is starting to push out just a little. I mean, maybe there's about a 32nd of an inch there, but I could just be off on my mark a little bit. So that's pretty impressive. I'm kind of surprised. I thought surely, you know, after exposing it to these extreme temperatures, like I said, about 7 degrees for the last 10 hours, I would see something. But nothing yet, surprisingly. So what I want to do next is thaw these. And so I'm going to put them all on paper towels out here. And my thinking is, I don't see anything obvious where these have failed, but perhaps as they thaw, let's say there's just a real slow leak with all the expansion and contraction going on, that maybe I'll see on the paper towels some dye. I'm just thinking along the lines of when the water inside these pipes and fittings froze, of course it expanded. And so did it cause particularly the metal parts, like these rings, the crimp rings on the outside, or these brass fittings, did it cause that metal to expand gradually over time to the point that as they thaw now, that metal will not return and contract to the original state? And whereas maybe the plastic will, the PEX, and so then I'll start to see maybe a slow leak, some dye left over from these different ones here. But I mean, just giving all the pipes and fittings a quick look over, there aren't really any signs of damage. I don't know if you can tell in the video, but if you look real closely at where these crimp rings are, you can tell the PEX has expanded. I mean, it looks like it's bulging and that ring is trying to keep it from expanding. So I think it will be really interesting to see as these thaw, are the fittings, the metal and plastic fittings and the crimp rings, will they contract back down to the original size, or has it caused some permanent damage? And by the way, if you didn't catch earlier in the video, this one here, this one does have blue dye in it. When I was filling this up, some of that blue dye got into the end of the actual flex pipe right there, and I guess it's a little porous, and so that's why it's blue there. So that was there at the beginning. But yeah, I'm just gonna let these sit out all day and thaw, and then come back and check and see if we've got any dye. Well, 24 hours have passed and these guys are completely thawed, and so let's take a look. I set these all on the paper towel yesterday to defrost, and so they have just been sitting here untouched for a full 24 hours. And initially, I don't see anything going on. I don't see any stains with the dye on the paper towels here, but I'm gonna carefully lift them up and just see if there's even some small drips perhaps. So I'm going to start here with the flex, the blue line, and let's just see. I don't see any blue dye at all. So that one appears to be in the clear so far. Let's check out the plastic fittings here with the green dye. Lift him up very carefully. And I don't see any green dye on that one either, okay? So that one's all okay. How about the brass? So this one has the red dye. Let's lift it up carefully. Ooh, wait a second. I don't know if you can see that. Okay, so there are some very small red dots actually over here too. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. This is on the brass with the red food coloring. And yeah, I've got 3 little spots here of red that correspond to the fittings there. I'm going to come back here and test this one out a little bit more later, but let's check out the SharkBite. This has the yellow food coloring in it, and I don't see any yellow food coloring. So out of the 4, this is really interesting. The brass, just from thawing, I can see some little red dots there from the dye. But next, you know, these aren't under pressure. They're just sitting here stagnant, right? So next I want to take these and give them a really good shake, just like before when I mixed them up, when I first put the water and the dye in there and I was shaking them like crazy. I'm going to do the same thing here over the paper towel, and that way I'll be able to tell under pressure if there's even just a slow leak somewhere. I'll get lots of splatter out here. Okay, so the shaking alone in midair was not enough to get any of them to leak any more dye. And so as you saw, I started actually taking them almost like a hammer and hitting them onto the table with the paper towel underneath. And this is really interesting. So the flex pipe here with the blue dye, I mean, I was hitting this thing really hard and nothing. I cannot find even the slightest bit of blue dye anywhere on that one. Check this out over here on the plastic fittings. As I started tapping this one, notice how it is leaking. And so obviously this probably expanded right here, and that's where it's just got a real slow leak after the freeze. But then over here on the brass, which already had dripped, just sitting here thawing, as I started tapping it out, check this out. More red dye. And so that just confirms even more so that this one is leaking as well. Over here on the SharkBite with the yellow dye, I do not see any dye again whatsoever. And so this one appears to have held up. And I'll just point out again, if you're noticing this blue dye right here and wondering if that is a leak, that actually happened at the beginning of the video when I was filling up the pipe. Some of the dye spilled over the edge, and I guess it's porous, and so it's soaked into the actual pipe there permanently, but it is not leaking. I mean, there is not a single bit of blue dye, which is really surprising on this flex line. But you know, I just find it interesting that out of these 4 plumbing systems, these different plumbing fittings, the 2 that did not fail, the flex line and the SharkBite, are the 2 that arguably received the most hate. Now, this is the first time that I've ever done an experiment like this, and so I really didn't know what to expect. But just being candid, going into it, I could see where the brass might fail, because I thought, well, it might expand when it freezes, and then it might not contract back to its original shape. And so I could see that one, but I really thought that the flex line was going to be the most vulnerable, the weakest out of the batch. And so it really surprised me that the flex line actually held up. Now, if I was to award places, you know, first place through 4th place, I guess in this case, first place tied, so it's really first place through 3rd, I would give first place to the SharkBite fittings and the flex line with the plastic fittings with the blue dye, because both of those systems didn't leak after the extreme freezing and then thawing and then tapping and hitting. None of those leaked. So that would be a tie for first place. Then I'd give second place to the plastic fittings with the regular PEX pipe that had the green dye, because that system, when it thawed, it didn't leak initially, but then when I started tapping it, then I could see some green dye, and so I'd give them second place. And then third place, last place, surprisingly, would be the brass fittings with the regular PEX pipe, because I mean, just right out of the thaw, it started leaking red dye, and then even more when I started tapping it. So what does this all actually mean, right? And I think first off, it's really impressive that none of the systems burst when they were under the extreme freezing. I mean, it got down into the single digits, right? If I had put a copper based system in the test, then I think we definitely would have seen something actually burst. And so I think that's just a testament to PEX and just how amazing PEX products actually are, and the way they can expand and contract and mitigate a lot of that risk that comes with freezing. And it's really the fittings in the end that are the most vulnerable. But at the end of the day, what is the application of all this within the RV community, right? And I'll just say first off that this is just one experiment. And so before drawing any conclusions, we want to repeat, do more experiments, and really figure out if these results are repeatable and verifiable, right? But I do think it's really interesting that the Flex line did not fail. I mean, these get a lot of hate within the RV community. It's hard to go on to social media and to a discussion forum and not find people complaining about these Flex lines, right? And so I think it's really interesting that this actually passed. And I think what's going on here is because the lines have so much flex, they can expand more. And so it didn't get to the fittings. It expanded more on the actual flex pipe itself. I also think it's really interesting with the SharkBite fittings here, how well this one performed. And there's at least one RV manufacturer, if not more, that are beginning to experiment with incorporating these in their builds out of the factory. In fact, a few months back, I did a video showcasing a SharkBite PRV that I installed on my RV, which has been holding up just fine, by the way. So if you're interested in that, I'll definitely put a link up above. But then the brass fitting, is kind of surprising, because as a consumer, when I hear metal, I think metal is better than plastic, right? And there's a new RV brand that actually advertises that they use brass fittings, and they advertise that they're superior, of course, to plastic, or at least that's the impression that we get. And so I was really surprised here that out of all of them, this one got third place. And I think what's going on here is when the brass expanded, it just wasn't able to contract and go back to its original shape. And so, yeah, maybe brass is more durable in terms of snapping or cracking like a plastic fitting, but if you get into a freezing situation, maybe it's a little bit more vulnerable given the way that brass expands and contracts. Well, let me just close out the video by saying, I'm kind of splitting hairs here. And so these are all great plumbing systems. Don't panic if you have one of the systems like the brass or the plastic fittings with the PEX that failed and started leaking, because remember, I exposed them to some pretty extreme temperatures below freezing for almost 5 days, and it got all the way down into the single digits, right? And so, I mean, that was a pretty extreme test. Don't do that to your RV, by the way. So don't panic if you've got one of those plumbing systems. I mean, these are all great plumbing systems. Maybe you could say there's a good, better, best out there, right? And there's all different pros and cons. This is just one test involving freezing. There's other tests you could do with pressure, and just to see, which one can withstand the most pressure, right? So at the end of the day, I was just curious and wanted to know, how do these plumbing systems perform under extreme freezing? And I was really surprised with the Flex line there. Well, anyways, guys, if you have any questions, definitely drop me a comment below. And as always, thanks for watching.